Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Turner. I'm the Managing Director here at RiskNZ, and welcome to this first spring 2022 Lunchtime seminar. I would like to thank and acknowledge firstly the support of RiskNZ sponsors who make this all possible, and that's CAMS, Protect, Aon, LexisNexis, SIO Global, Insurance Business New Zealand, and F24. All participants have been put on mute, but please feel free to type questions straight into the Q&A panel anytime during the session. We'll have that Q&A session towards the end of the presentation, so please ask anything at all. It's all very relevant. So now on to today's topic, futures modelling for next-gen risk management. It's my great pleasure to introduce you all to the presenter, Jackson Calder, founder and CEO of JC Limited. Jackson has extensive experience as a researcher and analyst of international relations, foreign and defence policy, geostrategic infrastructure initiatives, climate change, trends in technology, autonomous weapon systems, cybersecurity, and other related fields. Wow, that's a lot of experience there. Really looking forward to this. Over to you, Jackson. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, David. Kia ora, everyone. I'm Jackson Calder. As David said, I'm going to be talking to you about futures modeling for risk management today. Quick thanks to David and RiskNZ for giving me the opportunity. Some of the ideas here are, I hope I'm going to present you with some new things, some fresh ideas, and some of it can be quite challenging to get your head around, but I think that's really good. I think that shows that we're moving in some new directions with risk management. And I'm looking forward to some questions at the end. So just a quick overview of what I'll be talking about me, about the company. I'll give you a kind of introduction to what is futures modeling, both on the practical side and the mindset side and the approach. Horizon scanning, sense making. We're going to get into some of the matrices, and I'll show you some really cool tools that I'm trying to get out there to New Zealand businesses for risk management and all sorts. We'll talk a little bit about the power of narrative when talking about the future, and how important it is for stakeholder engagement. And then I'll say something about where I see kind of futures modeling going in New Zealand in a few different ways that the discipline can develop. So just quickly, have a BA from Victoria University, Masters of Strategic Studies from Vic as well. And I do a lot of volunteer work in the international relations sphere, NZIAA, UN, Young Professionals Program, been involved with Asian New Zealand Foundation, Diplosphere, done some work for the Ministry of Defence. And I started JC Limited in 2021. So the idea behind the company was that, through my master's, I got taught, we were lucky to have a professor who came straight from the Pentagon a few years ago. He spent 8 years in the Pentagon, I believe, and he introduced us to all this big strategic toolkit that is traditionally reserved for national security practitioners. The Pentagon, RAND, DARPA, kind of really just infinite budget, really, really big picture kind of thinking. And I think that this toolkit doesn't need to always be applied for national security. We can give this to even small, medium-sized businesses throughout New Zealand, and I think this approach can improve resilience and agility, which is more important now than ever in the high era of hyper change and complex interdependence and things like this. And we'll talk a bit about that. So when I say futures to people, I think a lot of people default to speculative stocks. They're like, oh, come on, like you're a bit of a snake oil salesman. And that is totally fair, So we need to get this idea of what actually is the future. when it's presented to us, it tends to be commodified, and we really, I think, need to get away from that if we're going to enter a new time of strategic planning and risk management and thinking about the trajectory that we're on and our businesses are on. The future, it has to be engaged with. It's an ongoing process, and there's a term coined by a futurist in the States, Scott Smith. He said it's called flat pack futures, and these are kind of the commodity idea carried through to the consulting world. And it's like, people will say they'll forecast for you or they'll predict for you. They'll just deliver you a kind of pre-packaged flat pack future that's over-engineered, and they say, this is where you're heading, this is what you look like in 5 years, and there's no kind of engagement with clients and things like this. So I think that idea of the future as something that can just be packaged and delivered, that reduces our agency, and that actually, I think, closes off pathways instead of opens pathways. So I want to proliferate this idea of the future as, we have to engage with it. It's an ongoing thing. We have to accept that it's always changing, but we also have to accept that we can change it, Why should we practice futures? So risks, ultimately, as far as I see it, risks are uncertainties. And for a long time, pretty much forever, uncertainty has been seen as something that we need to minimize at all costs. And you can even have kind of upper management or even executives, managers of an organization. They don't even want to know, if they don't have to know, what the risks are, as long as they're being managed. It's always just minimize uncertainty at all costs. Futures modeling is a way of facing uncertainty head on and actually using it in a productive way. So if we have the right approach and the right mindset and the right tools, we can voluntarily expose ourselves to uncertainty. We can seek it out over the horizon and use it as somewhat of a telescope or a compass, a constructive tool. We can use it for discovery and harness it, essentially. And I think this is more important than ever now, when complex interdependence, issue linkage is more complex than ever. People on, something happens on social media, it can affect national security. Something happens in one corner of a town in the US, an ideological kind of wave can ripple through to New Zealand and end up on the lawns of Parliament. The risk profiles are so interconnected, and I think futures modeling is a way to approach that holistically, try to connect the dots and see how things might unfold. Who practices futures? Because so a lot of people in New Zealand, you have no idea what futures modeling is, and so just to lend a little bit of credibility to some of the things I'm about to show you, there's one company in the US called Changeist. These are some of the companies they've worked with. Changeist does, mostly narrative. They focus on narrative scenario building, for stakeholder engagement, horizon scanning, really, really interesting design and narrative mix approach to kind of risk management. And so, yeah, I mean, NASA, Nokia, UNICEF, Nesta, some big organizations are interested in futures modeling. Another company is called Useful Fiction LLC. They have a little bit more of a defense and intelligence past, the two guys that run it, but you can see there some of their clients. I hope the text isn't too small and people can see it, by the way, but you know, Australian Defence Force, Canadian Army, NATO, Norwegian Army, US Air Force, all of these organizations are engaging futures modelers. So I think this is a really good sign, and I think that New Zealand has a future of a futures modeling industry as well, and that's what I'm trying to do, I guess. So our first methodology, I suppose, is horizon scanning, and we're sensing the environment around us. So in trying to spot risks on the horizon, blind spots, look at flow-on effects of changes you're seeing, we need to be sensing, finding information in the environment, and then after that, we need to be sense making, which is kind of organizing our thinking and plugging that information into all the different tools we have. So horizon scanning is you're looking for information from any point that it can possibly come from. And it sounds a little bit up in the air, but you can set up a really, really great network, open source intelligence network for sensing change in the environment. A lot of the time I think we rely too much on a quantitative approach to spot change, and numbers do tell a really compelling story a lot of the time. But in horizon scanning for futures modeling, we're leaning a bit more into qualitative. And I really like these pictures I've included here from Watchmen, the comic and the film. Ozymandias, this character, is a super genius, just fiercely intelligent, runs like countless companies, essentially kind of controls he's like pulling the strings, right? And he sits in front of these TVs for hours on end, and then his aides walk in and say, what's the next move? And he says, public sentiment's shifting that way, invest in this, up production of this, divest from this, you know. So that's a cool kind of analogy. I think that's what horizon scanning kind of is. Information can come from anywhere. If you're trying to spot uncertainty on the horizon, you're trying to spot potential risks and potential opportunities, you never know where kind of important information might come from. It's important to create a network of information that you need to cast the net wide, but you also do need it to be relatively refined, you know, and you need to know what are important signals and what is just fluff, I suppose. And this takes time to develop. I just have an ongoing horizon scanning, you know, practice that I've been doing for years, and a few friends as well who contribute. You know, open source, and it's an open source intelligence network, and we allow ourselves to try to be Ozymandias, if you will, and be able to spot risks that are emerging or perhaps even yet to emerge and may not ever emerge. But it's about getting in that mindset. Scanning scanners is really great. A lot of people, journalists, they will provide like regular updates, morning brew, and, you know, link aggregators. Strat4 is another good one for geopolitics. Look through these sources when you have time. Find signals of future change. I've just put an example in here of this Dyson headphone. I saw this earlier this year. This is a link you might look at and just, you know, be like, oh, that's weird, and move on. But it's about getting into this mindset of thinking, what is that? What signals is that showing us? What future is Dyson seeing, you know? And these are important things. When you look at that headphone, it's like, oh, a future that is perhaps quite individualistic, and you start to think about Wall-E and everyone's just in their own little pod, with all being entertained all the time. Things like this, interpreting information we're seeing in the environment, how are markets moving? How is tech moving? How are these things interacting with culture and with society? It's all very important to try get our head around it as best as we can and to know where to look for it. We can't forecast everything or predict everything, obviously. Black swan events are essentially events that you cannot possibly be predicted. I think the term comes from, I think it was a Dutch explorer or something, and he had never seen a black swan. So he said, black swans don't exist, like it's impossible. And then he traveled to another country and he saw one. So the idea is it's a black swan event is like, it's impossible until it happens. And so we need to just also have that in the back of our mind. Forecasting is great, but there's always going to be things that you cannot foresee. And that comes back to designing strategy really well, and having a strategy that's flexible, integrating, resilience and agility into your operations, into your business to accommodate potential black swans. Okay, we're getting a little bit into the weeds here, but I want to challenge everyone a little bit. I was thinking the other day about how more companies kind of have skin in the political game by no actions of their own. It's because the external risk profiles are changing more rapidly now than ever that we need to be on the front foot. We need to be proactive. We need to be scanning the environment and spotting things that are altering our risk profiles, but it's not that we have to act to alleviate it. But in this example here with this game is made by a company called Blizzard, like a $70 billion gaming company. This character, Zarya, had a white Z on her, and it just meant to represent her name, the first letter of her name. She's been in this game forever, for years and years, I think. Suddenly, her symbol, and it's a very popular game, by the way, her symbol becomes a symbol of what some would argue is fascism. So Blizzard, through inaction, through doing nothing, the risk to their business, to their reputation, goes through the roof, because even within a couple of days of this coming out, of the symbol emerging, people were saying, oh, Blizzard are supporting Russia and all this stuff. It's insane. And so they redid the skin on the character to get rid of the Z. But how could you ever foresee that happening? That's not in the plan. And also, if you're not kind of flexible enough to make changes quickly, and also if you're not scanning the environment and connecting the dots of political risk like this, then you're gonna get left behind quickly, because things change so fast. So everyone's probably seen a steep table before, and it's a little bit boring. I have my apprehensions about it, but after sensing and after horizon scanning to try spot uncertainty and change and risks emerging, we need to categorize our thinking for the next stage. And steep is, it's tried and true, with your social, technological, economic, environmental, political categorizations. it's a good way of organizing thinking. But what I like to add in for a futures modeling project or practice is a horizon and then a probability. We see a change and we see this is the evidence for the change and the potential risk emerging for us. What's the time frame? How plausible is it or probable? And what kind of steep categorization is it? This is something that I have a client in Auckland, and I've just told them, get steep tables, get a template of steep tables on A4 piece of paper and just put them on every desk in the office. And this is something that people can chip away at. They see a signal, like in their horizon scanning, they go home and watch the news one night and they see something and they interpret it some way. They may interpret it differently if they're, after hearing from me about horizon scanning. And then they get to work next day and they can just jot it down in a steep table. And you build up this big database of signals over time and of changes and trends and different likelihoods. And this is really important data to collect if you want to start modeling futures and see how your business could develop over the next 6 months to 10 years. If we find something that we think is quite important, or even it could be what we call a weak signal, it's important sometimes to just game it out without building matrices and risk matrices, which I'll show you next. Sometimes it's important to just try game out implications of things. An impact wheel like this can be done super quick. You can have these printed out in A4 as well in the office, which I've told my client to do as well, and just let people brainstorm implications. This is what I mean when I said at the start, this is a very qualitative approach to risk management. We're not really looking at the numbers and kind of what is the data telling us. We're looking at what do I think, my interpretation of the strategic environment and of the world and our business's operating environment. What do I think will happen? And this was one, this example here was done for a construction company in Auckland. The supply chain is a critical kind of factor at the moment, and we're just gaming out first level implications, second level implications, third level. We're attaching valences to them, so there's only one plus here, one positive potential future implication, the rest are negative. And then we're putting a steep classification on them as well. So you have an event, and then 3 implications later, potential implications later, you can see, oh, that's a positive technological and economic flow-on effect that we might not have seen before. And boom, that's excellent information. Get that in your database, So impact wheels are really, really helpful. Our first matrix. So when you want to do a more robust futures modeling practice, I think we should be building impact uncertainty and critical uncertainty matrices to really game out implications of change and spot risks and opportunities. This is an impact uncertainty matrix from your horizon scanning, from your steep tables, from what you're seeing in the environment and the information you've collected. You can plot trends and changes on here. How much of an impact do we think it will have? How much uncertainty do we have about it? And if in this top right section, the dark gray, this is your critical uncertainties zone, highest impact, highest uncertainty. I'm looking to create this tool and the next tools you'll see in like an interactive digital format, which I think will be super helpful, but I don't have the tech skills to get there quite yet, but I reckon this would be a really cool program. Oh, and you can plot drivers as well, and you'll see in this example. This was for a construction company in Auckland. This is from horizon scanning, from research. This is a good little snapshot of the strategic environment for this company and for a lot of companies in that industry. Something like building information modeling as a trend is reasonably high impact, quite low uncertainty, because we know it's already in practice. We already know it can speed up all phases of a build. We kind of, it's known, and that's great. But then you get further to the right here. How is big data going to play out? Labor robotics, extreme weather, additive manufacturing, which is now we can print metals. These are the things that you probably want to be spending more time thinking about when we're trying to manage risks. I've plotted climate change as a driver here too of multiple trends. And it's important, you don't always need to find drivers. Sometimes there isn't one particular driver, but something like climate change is a very clear driver of multiple trends. Climate change is what we call a threat multiplier or a threat amplifier. It kind of layers onto existing risk profiles and amplifies conflict over food and water. It amplifies the degradation of infrastructure, all sorts. So yeah, impact uncertainty matrices are excellent. From this, those critical uncertainties, say extreme weather, robotics, big data, supply chain, let's take those and look at how they'll converge in the future. So this is a critical uncertainties matrix. You've identified your critical uncertainties from the last step. We can extrapolate those trends in different directions and get 4 different future scenarios that where those trends converge. Here's a couple examples. I really hope these aren't too small and everyone can see them. On the left, we've got the ubiquity of robots and data. Oh, sorry, we've got technological developments as a trend in the construction industry, extrapolated in 2 different directions. Complete ubiquity of robots and data, or we stay human focused, which is more of a status quo right now. How does that meet extreme weather events in the future? They stay irregular, which is right now, they are irregular, but they're getting more common. Or say in 20 years, we're having the 1 in 100 year storms twice a year. So how do these things interact? And you produce future scenarios. And then the one on the right is net zero green building, which is a huge trend right now, and supply chain, general market disruption. My favorite one here is net zero green building becoming industry standard, which is very on the way to happening, meets a fragmented supply chain. I labeled this future progress paradox because, we're trying so hard the regulations might overlap the reality in terms of access to energy efficient and sustainable, green building materials, because the supply chain is so fragmented. So these are interesting futures that you can explore. And this is just a case study that I did for the Ministry of Defense. I was exploring autonomous weapon systems, great power competition, and the rise of non-state actors as well. And this comes with an entire report, and narratives for every future scenario as well. Okay, don't read these. These are just here. I just want to show you, this is what a scenario narrative can look like. So I like to write short kind of snapshots, almost day in the life of each of these 4 scenarios. And it's so important, I think, for stakeholder engagement to lean into this idea of narrative. And this is again emphasizing the qualitative approach over quantitative to a lot of risk management. And I think what's important about engaging stakeholders with the power of narrative and talking about the future is that the ultimate goal of all this is to generate foresight and feed your foresight back into strategy today. Design strategies that are more flexible and, are more resilient to changes that you're seeing on the horizon. And strategies need to be resourced. You need to, a good strategy can't be fluff. You need money, you need people, and you need expertise, and you need time to implement a good strategy. And sometimes getting in bigger and complex organizations, getting the right people on board can be tough. I'm sure a lot of you know that firsthand. So we need to kind of leverage the power of storytelling. We're talking about the future here. A lot of it, forecasting it's essentially speculation, but it's useful fiction. It's grounded in reality, but it doesn't exist yet. So why not tell stories about it to get people involved into resource plans now. So yeah, those are just 2 short narratives I wrote for those ones. A great example of this is An Eye for a Storm is a short novel. I think it's 30 pages long, and Useful Fiction LLC wrote it. They got approached by the Australian Defence Force, who's implementing, it was an education strategy for how to educate future soldiers on the tech that they'll be using. This one had a big focus on augmented reality and virtual reality for training soldiers in future operating environments. And they did their whole futures modeling report, some excellent horizon scanning, market research, interviews, talking with experts in the field. And instead of just producing a report, a PDF or a Word doc, they wrote a 30-page mini novel. And An Eye for a Storm became the single most circulated and widely read document in Australian Defence Force history. And people from militaries overseas all throughout Five Eyes were asking for copies of it. And they put it online into the public domain. And it just, everyone loved it because it's grounded, it's a story, it's fiction, but it's grounded in real trends, real change, real risks. But it kind of puts all of that into situations with made up characters in a made up situation. And yeah, it did really, really well. And the Australian Defence Force, as far as I know, are kind of trying to follow it to a T. So narrative is a really, really powerful tool that goes hand in hand with modeling futures that I think that we need to lean into. sorry, just checking the time. I'm actually moving quite fast here. I'll linger a little bit on this last slide, but we will have plenty of time for Q&A. So the future of futures in New Zealand. Where do I see this going? I think first off, the most important thing is to proliferate the mindset, these general approaches to the future. That's the first thing. And that goes back to one of the first slides on, let's get away from this commodified idea of what the future is. If we can get everyone on the same page and engaged with this idea that the future is a process, an ongoing process that we have to very intentionally interact with and try to shape. That's one of the main goals of my company, is to talk to as many organizations as I can and to get these ideas out there. And I don't want to be the only one doing futures modeling. My goal is to give people the tools and they can go do it themselves. I want organizations creating an ongoing futures modeling practice within their own business. And that's what I was talking about with one of my clients, where I said, like, I am doing more robust reports for them, but I said, you need steep tables and you need impact wheels and you need, matrix templates on everyone's desks or in communal areas. And you need to encourage people to think about the future and to engage with it and write down the signals they're seeing in the environment, write down emerging trends, emerging changes, even if it's what we call a weak signal now, which is, it's very, very hard to, if you presented evidence to someone, it's very hard to justify that might be a trend. Even as a weak signal, write it down. And in a year, because things move fast, in a year, you can look back through this big database you have of scanning the environment, and you go, look at that. Someone wrote that down a year ago. That's just happened, So that's the kind of major change I think that we need, is just getting everyone committed to kind of some ongoing futures modeling at that kind of entry level. In terms of, say, professionals of the discipline, which I suppose I am, there are two ways I kind of see it going, which is brute force forecasting or precise use cases. With brute force, what I mean by this is we can just forecast everything all the time. And if we pump out 1,000 alternative future scenarios, how likely is it that one of them will hit, will unfold in real time? And then we can say, oh, look, see, I predicted it, or I forecasted it. I don't think that's the way. I think that brute force forecasting is certainly something that will emerge, likely through AI. We have a lot of predictive models for quantitative things. We don't have a lot of good predictive models for qualitative things. AI and machine learning is getting much better now at it's being trained on reason and logic, and there are some really interesting artificial intelligences coming out now that are more on that qualitative side. So I think that will emerge in time, but I think the human focused approach right now, and if kind of futures modeling and forecasting professionals are to have credibility and utility for clients, I think it's all about the precise use cases. It's all about tailoring the approach to the horizon scanning. And I think in the end that produces better results. I mean, that's what I've done so far. So I can't actually speak to the outcomes of brute force, but I think it's quite safe to say that precise use cases are the way to interact with the future. Yeah, I think New Zealand in general, we've never been very good strategists. And a lot of people in the public sector will speak to that as well. But that is changing. And New Zealand's maritime security strategy, which launched last year, I believe, that was called by some of the people involved a maturation of New Zealand's strategic processes. And that is a great piece of strategy, I think, that document. And so we're kind of at the beginning right now of this wave of, a strategic maturation in New Zealand, and the way that we design strategy, the way that we look at our environment, the way that we choose to interact with the future. So I think now is the time to, we need to be on the front foot. We need to take a proactive stance. And part of what makes being proactive easier, I think, is generating foresight and really using as much information as we can gather about risks that are emerging on the horizon to feed into our planning right now. I saw a statistic a while ago, maybe last year. I think it's something like 60% of councils in New Zealand don't have a plan or a strategy in place for climate change. It's and I mean, what does that tell you? Climate change is one of the easiest things to identify as well. There's so much more that is so much harder to uncover and connect the dots on and see how risks might develop or where they might emerge. And we need to be planning. We need to get better at planning. And I think foresight and modeling futures is an excellent way to do that. Makes us look inward at our current, the structure of the organization, even, or crisis response planning, and looking out to the horizon makes us look in at all of that inherently. And it makes us reassess, are we flexible enough? Do we have, are we resourcing the right areas, the right people to face these emerging risks? Look at that, pretty much right on time. So we'll move on to the Q&A now. Sorry if I rushed through any parts of this. Please feel free to ask me to elaborate on anything, and I'll happily do that. But thanks, everyone. I'll pass back on to David now.
Hey, thanks, Jackson. Look, I really enjoyed that. That was absolutely brilliant. And look, I'm a huge believer in thinking about risk and creating and discussing. And I think New Zealand, especially my number of members, are really doing that now and really looking ahead. So this is very timely. Hey, look, we've got a question here from David Reeves. The question is, do you use horizon scanning to see instances of a specific risk event you want to track in your register and use those instances to justify the likelihood score of that risk event in your register?
I mean, yes, perhaps. I think what an interesting methodology is that question has made me think of is called backcasting. And backcasting is just creating an event out of nowhere. So within your organization, you can say this is like our number one worst case scenario for us over the next 5 years. And there might not be any evidence pointing to that happening right now, but they still want to game it out and see what might happen. So they say, this is our biggest risk profile. Say it's an event or a kind of market change that happens in 5 years from now. You start at that baseline and you backcast instead of forecast. So you backcast to figure out, okay, what would have to have happened for this to happen? And backcasting through that process can then give you an idea of what is the likelihood, of this actually happening, because things are domino effects sometimes. And so it's like, okay, any of these one things perhaps in isolation is like has quite a high chance of happening, but this chain of events that we've figured out most likely needs to happen for this risk to materialize. The likelihood of the entire chain of events is very, very low. And so if you're going for really specific risks and to determine likelihood, and I think backcasting is an interesting methodology. It's definitely has utility. So overall, I think the answer to the question is yes.
Thanks, Jackson. Yes, I would agree with you. Great. Now, another question from Madison Burgess-Smith. Are there generic impact uncertainty matrices that would apply across a number of sectors that businesses should be looking to?
Generic matrices.
It's generic impact uncertainty matrices.
Yeah, so I think that I don't have one to like just be like, yes, there is, but I think that there's definitely, you can set the scope of any kind of matrix building or forecasting exercise to be as wide as you like. And so I think something like a general market kind of impact uncertainty database like that, and being able to plot trends that cover, precise use cases are good, I think, but being able to plot a matrix like that can just cover multiple sectors and stuff, I think is worthwhile. And that's what I mean about, like, I want to build the matrices into a interactive kind of program, digital format, because it would just be so cool to have that proliferated throughout New Zealand and just kind of become a mainstay in any medium-sized organization or bigger, and perhaps even open source some of it. If people want to contribute to it, you could have a massive open source database with companies from all around New Zealand, all plotting trends, and it's like a big shared, like a Google Doc or a big shared Excel spreadsheet, shared impact uncertainty matrices for entire kind of multi-sector kind of thing. So yeah.
Great, thank you, Jackson. Another question, anonymous. Could you please explain the impact uncertainty matrix in more detail? You have climate change as a driver with a line moving up and to the right. You have several trends identified above and below the trend line. Please, could you explain what we should take away from this model? How is this different from our standard, and in brackets, outdated, risk heat map?
Yeah, so if I just go back quickly. So what I think is important with this, and what I want to kind of, why I think it would be really cool to make it like interactive as well, is because this is even these matrices maybe not particularly critical uncertainties, which are more on the deliverable side of a futures modeling project. An impact uncertainty matrix is designed to be constantly iterated as well. So it's hard to do in a when you're doing them manually, kind of how I've had to do it so far. But the idea is for this tool to reach a stage where it's like a living kind of, like you say, like a risk heat map. But you can plot, ideally you can plot drivers, and there's a certain amount of kind of logic built into the system that when you drag a trend around, the driver would adjust as well. Or when you plot a new trend, the driver another trend might, this, oh, we've just added big data applications onto here and we think it's quite uncertain. And then the logic of the system would go, okay, well, based on that, building information modeling is a bit more impactful then, and it would adjust like this. And so I think this tool is, it's not trying to reinvent the wheel. And I didn't, it's like, I didn't invent this methodology. This methodology comes from, national security practitioners of days past. But I think that it's just a really nice, it's a nice visualization, as risk heat maps are as well. But I think that it's about kind of the focus is getting things in that critical uncertainty zone in the top right. And once they're there, knowing how to develop them and what to do with them, and like harnessing uncertainty and turning it into a productive tool. And what that is creating these matrices. So yeah, we can't be trying to get too far away from things that we know, matrices and ideas about looking at risk that we know work, and we know that heat maps work, and we know that this tool works. And I think it's just at the genesis really of where it could be as a tool. Like I say, with developing it online and making it interactive and making it kind of have some operate with some kind of logic system behind it and things like that. But I hope that shed a little bit more light on it.
Hey, thank you, Jackson. Look, no more questions at this stage. Any last ones, please type them in quickly. But look, they can always get back to us and we can always pass them on. But I think you've certainly captured my and everyone else's imaginations with that, and really can see the benefits of getting into that. And look, from what I'm hearing, this is certainly the future where we're going, looking further and really adding to that risk management. So look, I'd really like to take the opportunity to thank you, Jackson. That was very interesting. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did as well. Thank you everyone for coming today and making the time for the lunchtime seminar. This webinar has been recorded and will be sent out to you in the next couple of days. So it'll be a great reference. And of course, if you're not a member already of Risk New Zealand, we'd love to have you join us. If you know someone else who'd like to join, please get in touch also. And thank you once again for coming along, and look forward to seeing you at many more Risk New Zealand events. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.